Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of the Wayward Black Woman podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Gray, or Alicia M. Gray. You can even call me A.M. Gray if you like. Today's podcast is going to be quick and simple, and I do apologize for being a bit late. I have been really busy this week. But I wanted to touch on the topic of some of the things that I've been speaking of on both X and Instagram. And that's the subject of provocation. And in this instance, we're speaking of the provocation towards violence. Now, there have been several instances this week where I've had an opportunity to notice the prevalence of subtle violence. And when I say this, I mean this violence has been accepted. It's been underlying other things that have happened. So people have been putting aside the fact that these instances are necessarily related. But it is noticeable, especially for a psychological professional such as myself. I see the violence, and I think that it's important that we start to recognize when it occurs and when it does not occur. Now, personally, in my own life, I've seen many instances of violence that I think have affected me profoundly. In fact, many people don't even realize how much violence was projected upon me even as a child. And my mother had a number of issues with anger, and it oftentimes projected upon me. You guys know, most of you anyway, that I did not grow up with my father. He was in jail my whole life. He was an alcoholic, and he did abuse my mother. You know, she has a mark on her forehead from when he hit her with a hammer to this day. So she was, traumatized by that, in addition to being impoverished growing up. And I talk about my grandmother being very poor in the projects of Jeffrey Wilson, which they did tear down from Portsmouth, or P-Town in Virginia, as we called it. A lot of people know my story because I say it, but yet a lot of people pretend as if they don't know it, just as if I did not say it. When people are jealous of you, when people have an enormous amount of projected anger, they pretend as if they don't hear what you're saying. You know, for instance, later in life, I had instances where people wanted to make me into something that I was not, based upon, say, my mother's history, her father, or some people in her family may have been heavy drinkers. I didn't really know them too much. I only knew my grandmother, who passed away when I was a small child on her side. But I mean, that also affected her mentally, and I do understand that. But it's still not a justification for violence, right? I still don't think that when you project violence upon other people, when you try to get material things to cover up your own insecurities, when you allow for that to be accepted, and you look for something as a replacement, right? That's not something that should be within your vocabulary. It's not something where you should be using displacement. And many people in our society are doing that. We do it in the Black community all the time. And they say, oh, it's the rap culture, it's the hip hop culture. No, it's not. It's displacement. You want to have this for that and ignore the fact that we are going through trauma. And that's not acceptable. So one of the things that I've seen, and this is including police violence, which I've experienced later in life. As I said before, I'm from the South and they are extremely racist. So they've objectified the fact that, I have this family history, and they look for vulnerabilities, especially in black women. I don't know how many of you have been victimized by predatory behaviors. It's just as if you go for a loan and there's predatory lending, and you complain and you complain, and you have to take a high interest loan because you couldn't get the loan at the bank, and even though you had good credit, or you didn't have good credit, and you didn't have good credit because you went through years of harassment, moving and changing jobs because of the racism and the harassment. And you can't explain that. You can't see that on an application, right? You just know racism is real, and no one understands the trauma that you've been through. So this is something that we have within explicitly the African American and indigenous communities. And this is way before Trump got into office again. So this is not what I'm referring to at this time. I'm not even going to go into Trump, but I'm talking about just the history and narrative of racist connotation within everything that we do, and having no outlet. Again, there's no justification for violence. So don't get me wrong. I am not justifying violence, but I'm saying we need to deal with the reality that is. The jealousy that we've developed, the internalized oppression, which covers up the narrative that exists, that there's racism. We know this. When we internalize oppression, it helps white supremacy. And it's shocking the amount of internalized oppression that we still have in our community. It's shocking when you have to wonder if they're going to attack your children like it's 1985. And you have to teach your children about racism to this day. And even these subtle ways that black men will not take care of their families because they're still internalizing racism from the things that have happened to them. And some of these men have money. They just don't decide that their families are important. Okay, and yes, we get this treatment all over the world, quote unquote, this violent treatment, where people shun not only African American women, especially if we're single mothers, but they treat our children similarly because of colorism, because of racism, because of all these things. And I do understand that. I understand the downline of it. And I do understand that even if black men were here, they'd still probably get that treatment. And it's difficult for them to deal with. But what many don't understand is, at the end of the day, if they keep all of that, built up within them, it's not going to be healthy for the family. So it's got to be one of two choices. They've got to stand up for themselves, and they have to make a choice that they're not going to project that violence upon, someone else, either the woman or the child. And that goes for anyone who decides to internalize that type of racism. Now, I'm not going to blame people's own flaws specifically just on racist behaviors. Like, they're not internalizing racism fully as far as being a flawed individual, right? That means they're not doing this only because of racism. They're doing it because, they are just not good people sometimes. Sometimes they just really cannot get over childhood trauma or problems within their own perspective that they attribute to something else, because they cannot see themselves as being the actual cause of the problem, and they never will. Whether it be narcissistic personality disorder, whether it be just denial, they're never going to face it. And you really have to have a tremendous amount of patience with these people, and or dislodge from them, because they will ruin your lives. They will ruin your children's lives. They will try to ruin everything that you touch in order to have this envy, this spite, this feeling of accomplishment from using you because of their jealousy towards you. So my point is, when other people who are racist see this behavior for obvious reasons, they will start to also participate in this behavior. They will encourage this behavior, meaning white police officers especially. And sometimes you'll see a black police officer who has a jealousy problem towards his ex-girlfriend, some girl who won't talk to him. It's rare, but that does happen. When black men join into this behavior, it is equally as racist. It is equally as toxic. When black women participate in it, it is self-destructive to no end. And at that point, we will have nothing left. Now, people speak of us sitting there where everything is burning and not doing anything. I think at the very least, that is what we're doing. Because I think we've done so much that at this point, if people aren't listening, there's nothing more that can be done. And one of the things that I do, is put the podcast out. If people want to listen, they will. And I think that people do listen, but there's still a lot of jealousy, a lot of immaturity, a lot of don't want to hear it, still pretending. You'd be surprised at how many games that people play. And they pretend your personality is totally different because they're intimidated by who you really are. And it really doesn't bother me until they start to, provoke this type of violence that I'm talking about. And it's obvious. It's simplistic, but you'd be surprised at how someone else's provocation of violence could cause you both physical and mental harm. So getting back to what I was saying before, this week I saw several different Instagrams and stories on YouTube about basically violence and how people are internalizing violence. One of them reminded me of myself and my situation with my oldest child, who's 30 now, almost 31, in a few months. No, a couple months in May, because it's almost April now. Well, anyway, her father and I met when we were very young. He was not ready to be a father. This is what I thought, and this is why he was behaving in such an erratic way. He didn't take care of her. I did everything but diapers. Even I was working at the time, had a little piece of a car, and drove back and forth to work and would drive her, because we were not together during my pregnancy, because I was just not the type to put up with someone who would be disrespectful. That just was not going to happen. And I'd made up my mind I was going to have this child by myself, which was fine, because I just, saw the swing in behavior once the pregnancy was announced, and we all have seen that. And I won't even go into the it's not mine, and I mean, please, like I'm really that type, right? It was very immature, and I was very surprised that someone would try that type of behavior with me, knowing the type of person I was and knowing that that would be ridiculous. So this person became instantly a 3-year-old in a matter of months, right? And I was like, yeah, this is how some people are. They start, when they get, pushed into a corner, to become pretty much violent. I saw a subtle change in behavior, and then it was, someone else, because this was a impetulant child here. So I said, why have a child with a child? So I was like, I'm out. I tried to even co-parent for a while. I didn't realize that co-parenting involved 2 people. I was actually taking the child there so I could go to work when I did trust the person, because I didn't think it was, psychologically impaired. I just thought he was a snake in the grass, and I said I shouldn't take that on the child. I'd never seen someone who was like that in my life. I wasn't naive, I wasn't the type of person to be around someone who would be, uh, anywhere near mentally unstable enough not to leave a child at that time. I had not seen envy in my life besides my mother, who also didn't leave my child with. Growing up, she used to go my daughter to daycare all the time. I would never. I mean, my mother wouldn't babysit my child anyway because she's, like as I've said, very selfish and narcissistic. She always has been my whole life, not because she is a single parent, but because she is that type of personality. Always went to the club every weekend, always dancing with her girlfriends and going out on dates and things. She was, an extremely selfish person. And my older sister, I have one sibling, used to stay home and watch me, and we used to argue and fight all the time because, to a certain extent, she inherited some of those characteristics as well. And, the 90s was latchkey kid time, and we'd let ourselves in after school and we'd watch ourselves, and it was, to a certain extent, acceptable. I think the kids today are much more sheltered than what we were. So we always stayed by ourselves, and I'm used to taking care of myself for that reason. But, you know, back to what I was saying, I think that type of acceptance of I did everything and I was expected to do everything became the norm, and it allowed for an objectification of me to a point where it was accepted that I would, how could I say, because I don't want to make it seem as if I just laid there and did nothing, but it was acceptable for me to allow their violence, right? Because she's not going to do anything. She's not going to say anything. They knew I'd get angry, but to a certain extent, that anger did not bother them. Kind of like a wicked person. Kind of like they wanted me to get angry, because they felt like I didn't have a choice but to put up with it. When I say they, I mean my mother and my sister. And to a certain extent, Jasmine's father. And after a while, you see this pattern like, am I a pushover? And it becomes frustrating because you are a nice person, but you're not someone who allows for people to take advantage of you. At least I don't believe that I am. So after a while, I said, I'm not taking this child, buying diapers, buying food. I mean, I'm a feminist. I always have been a black feminist, but I'm not crazy. This is not co-parenting. Now, at the time, the father didn't have a job, and he didn't have a car. Now, backtrack, we used to work together, and I remember him being there, and then I remember him not being there. He did not mention that he had gotten fired for some type of, I don't know, weed offense or something like that, which at the time was very taboo. I did not know why he had been let go. He did not tell me, but some other employee had implied that. Of course, at that time, I was like working, and I was like, it was just too much for me, right? So I'm thinking maybe, and this is long after I think I found I was pregnant. So then that just doubled it, knowing I'm not that type of person. And I was just kind of like, ugh, because people are duplicitous. They have ways of covering up violence, and their behavior manifests whatever trauma they've been through. So this person, her father, had decided to develop this personality where he could basically cause harm by pretending to be something that he was not when it was convenient. It's a defense mechanism. And then this is, I'm not saying he's schizophrenic. I'm saying it's a totally different person from what he actually is. Some people are just very good at lying. They develop that trait, which is frustrating because at the time, we're talking the 90s for you people out there who are quite young, and that wasn't heard of. The most we'd seen is on Moesha, people giving people GHB. There was no thought process that there could be a Diddy out there. You guys remember when they gave Brandy GHB and she was with a guy on a date, and then, found out he tried to drug and all that kind of stuff. And it was unheard of even then. Very taboo. Because women were by themselves and everyone knew it. Women took care of everything by themselves. It was seen as being a good attribute. So why would you go and try to pretend as if, this was the opposite? That's when I saw the decline in treatment towards women. The violence crept up. We started seeing gangster rap when they were calling women bees and hoes. And it started to be a dichotomy. So if we're in charge and we're taking care of the family, why are these men taking advantage of us and lying on our behaviors, basically, and taking advantage of this entire situation? This is what happened in my life. And then white people, of course, attach themselves to that narrative because why wouldn't they? Because it was to their advantage. And to this day, I still see the same behavior in some parts of the black community. I see it, very subtly in other communities who attach to that type of racist narrative, and it's frustrating. Another thing I saw, because I was referring a minute ago to my own situation, was a YouTuber, Dane Calloway, who, talks a lot about his Native American heritage. He believes that he has. I also have Native American heritage, so I kind of get it, but some of his outlandish misogynoir antics are too much for me, right? I don't care how much he wants to attach Native American heritage. We cannot separate from the actual Native Americans that have been recognized. That only creates a rift, in my opinion. And we also have black Native Americans that live on the reservations. So none of his rhetoric about we were here first, and then pitting one against the other makes any sense. Why can't we work together? It's not naive, right? To think that at one point, if we work together, we would be stronger people. But what I see is an opportunity that's being missed and that's being instigated. And I don't like that instigation between the two. This is not the first time I've been through this. I've been, part Native my whole life. So I've seen many different aspects of this, including the new narrative where the migrants who came here are also, supposedly the same people that were here in Mexico, before the colonists came over and took over and colonized everything. Mexico was only the bottom half, actually the bottom left half of the United States. They were not the entire United States. All the rest were indigenous Indians. And whether they were black or brown or, who was here first, I don't think that should be the perspective that we should take. And no, not all these people who were colonized in Latin America and Central America, all the migrants that we had come over here, not all of those people are indigenous, and it's important that we understand that. These people don't even like indigenous people in their own countries in many aspects, and they definitely don't like darker skinned individuals. Not all of them, but most of them. They were taught prejudice, unfortunately, and as I just mentioned, internalized oppression as a way of life. So if people, don't want to be your allies, don't make them your allies. And if people in Native American communities don't want to be your enemies, don't make them your enemy. You're always going to have a prejudiced person in every community, even in your own. So don't judge a book by its cover. Depends on the individual. So back to what I was saying, as they're calling Dr. Umar Jeremy Shoemake, because I believe that's his real name. I really don't know. But Dane Calloway was referring to him because they've been beefing back and forth for a long time as, a deadbeat father. Now, this is not something unusual with Dr. Umar. If you guys know who Dr. Umar is, he's a black personality who claims to have a PhD in psychology. You guys know I have a master's in psych. And, some of the things he says are absolutely ridiculous and they're, controversial. I've never been a fan of Dr. Umar because obviously me knowing that he's full of it, because I have the same background, it's difficult for me to even listen to a con artist. I just can't, right? We have so many problems in the black community, so many problems with men. I don't have time for that. The Pan-Africanism sometimes bothers people I think it's exploitation of Pan-Africanism. I think it's the provocation of violence towards women that he also alludes to a lot. And this is long before this particular incident where his child is on TikTok or whatever she's on. His older child now is saying that he was never a good father, he wasn't in her life. That doesn't surprise me. Womanizing goes along with the con artist profile, right? I think there's a lot about this gentleman that's not true. Whether he's an FBI informant, whether he's, whatever he is, it's not what he's saying that he is, right? And that's compounded by the Breakfast Club, interviews with the accused rapist, Charlemagne the God. So that just tells me what club that he's in and why they keep inviting him back. So that's all I needed to know. And the fact that he's not taking care of his children, because it seems that he has another child as well, which I don't know if this is the one we've heard about. I mean, he's got children with multiple women. And we find that in the black community, this is more acceptable than anything. Now, I'm not saying having children and taking care of them. I don't care if you're married or not. I don't believe necessarily in religious patriarchy as being a basis of being a good parent. It has nothing to do with that. As you would hear, people tout religious patriarchy like it's their Bible. And what they don't understand is a lot of the Bible was actually misspoken. And they will, continue that misspeak as being what they think they know, but they really don't know a whole lot besides what they've been taught, right? And slaves were taught to read with the Bible. So a lot of things they're misinterpreting, and I understand that in black communities. Well, I'd never have a family without a mother and a father. I'd never did, all of that's not necessary. And what I see a lot of times is that prejudice creates problems within their understanding of what a good parent is. And they will start to bastardize, single mothers. They'll make women into the enemy. They'll start using sexism as a way of explaining themselves, and that's when it goes all wrong. In reference to Dr. Umar, he does this within his rhetoric himself, misogynoir. So does Dane Calloway. So it's frustrating for me because Dane Calloway is a guy, of course, who has children, and he talked about how he's a good father, he's married, but I've heard him say things about single parenthood as well. That subtle allusion to violence. So now we have, two men who are possibly involved in misogynoir, I'd say 89% of the time, going at one another because one is a father taking care of his children and one is a father who is not. In my opinion, they're both hiding behind masks. And I think that we need to talk about this subtle violence because at the end of the day, that's what it's going to be. Neither one is any more right than the other. Now, I do admit that Dr. Umar is an obvious fraud with the school and all these things. What he's proving, maybe he has a thing to prove, a chip on his shoulder or whatever. I don't know what his game is. At one point, I saw that he was related to some Hispanic individuals. Whether that was his stepfather or his real father, I don't know. This is important because of what I just told you about the situation with internalized oppression in the Hispanic Latino community. And I'm going to leave that where it is. But you get the gist of things. We need to look at the underlying violence and stop ignoring this violence because it's being seen by other communities. If you think people don't notice it, they do. And it's a problem, especially where black men are concerned. It leaves black women vulnerable, irregardless of if we're talking about another man not taking care of his responsibility, it still leaves black women vulnerable. As I said with my own child, later on when she was old enough, I told her she could go on Facebook or whatever and talk to her father. I really don't care for him. I did find out that he had multiple children. I don't know what the story was. I never did find out because I just didn't care. I didn't want to deal with him. I'd gone back and forth for visitation. He did spiteful things so that he would try to get out of paying child support. said things in court like, if I have to pay child support, then I want to see my child. Like, that was the only reason he wanted to see her. And I did find out later from child support enforcement, because that's really the only reason he probably would have said anything about visitation, because I did think that he needed to help pay for this child. I did find out later that he had another child because the woman asked me which case when I called, because I didn't speak to him anymore. I didn't want to. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, this is what this dude is upset about. He's, for lack of a better term, spreading his seed all over town. And now he's angry with me because he can't control his own behaviors, which was disturbing. Remember what I had just told you about the job situation. I don't deal with people who use drugs. I don't deal with, people like that. If I was dating Snoop Dogg, I would like to know. You know what I'm saying? But there are white people who believe that black women are like that. Or, as I said, Portsmouth is a small town. I really grew up in Chesapeake, but there's a lot of racist white people that want to believe that based upon who you're related to, that you're also that type of person. And you think, I did not grow up with racist people because of that reason. And that's very frustrating. So then they'll try to push a narrative, and then you have black people who may or may not be trying to get out of trouble themselves who participate. And I just was like, this is too stupid. I don't know. I don't want anything to do with this guy. Like, I don't know what his problem is. I don't know if he's purposely trying to use violence against me and I just kind of became a target. No way. That at that point became predatory violence, and I just was like, no. And his behavior became angry. And I was trying to figure out, why is this guy angry if I'm taking care of this kid by myself and he's doing nothing? That's not a natural reaction. His other reaction was, it wasn't his. I mean, are you serious? Being the person that I am, are you serious? You think that I wouldn't just go out and get some dude with millions of dollars and do this? Why? Or a better looking dude, or a guy who had at least a spine the way I look and how, as intelligent as I am, it just didn't make sense. Like, why do you think I would be bothered with this stupid mess? I don't care about money. I don't deal with people like that. My intelligence level is too high. It was such an insult to my intelligence level. I could not believe this person became a spineless, toothless rat. But this is something that happens in real life. It's real talk. So as we start to deal with our own realities, we have to start understanding we can't control everything, and we definitely can't control all the violence towards women. But other people who latch on to any type of insecurity where that violence is concerned will indeed try you. They're trying to get at who they are jealous of, who they're perceiving as being most vulnerable. And you do see this with Trump and people like that, because I'm telling you, all my life I've seen white supremacy, and they attach to your insecurities. Please believe, if you think they aren't paying attention, they are. It is very important for you not to internalize racism ever. Don't ever be someone who's comfortable with hurting another person, and everyone has insecurities. But when you start to put yourself above your child, above the family dynamic, above the culture, and just be a selfish person, at that point, you can't complain if someone attacks you with violence the way that you're projecting violence upon everyone else, right? So, two other things this week. People are complaining about the decision of Asian people being put into universities where they aren't getting in fairly. I should say, let me rephrase. People are complaining that Asian people who sued to get into universities because they felt that it was unfair are still having problems getting admitted. And they're saying this week they're going to maybe sue again. And I told you guys before about the other Asian guy who's a fake, who got into supposedly only the ones he wanted to get into but couldn't get into the others, and said, he was going to sue. This is another form of projected violence onto the black community. And I will admit that. I'm not going to stand up for people or be friends with people who are abusive towards African American people. They were used by Trump as a mask, and not only Trump, but any form of white supremacy to instigate violence because, again, you can see the underlying jealousy, which is absolutely unnecessary. They're looking for a way to attack the black community. I think we all can see that. And what they don't understand, the leopards eating their faces and all of that, which I commented on, is that white people are still bigoted against them. It has nothing to do with African American people. And I think that it's sad that they did find people within Asian communities that went along with that, even in the smallest amount of stupidity. In that moment, they should have seen that this was unacceptable. And so now we have that internalized oppression that they have growing and instigating this fire, this growing seed of jealousy, which isn't necessary. And it's going to end up backfiring in their faces because they're saying, okay, they're hiring still DEI under other means and stuff. Get real. It's a farce. They just feel like they're not well-rounded people because people who are bigots are generally not well-rounded people, right? So I think that would be common sense. I don't care what your IQ level supposedly is or your test scores are. If you're a bigot, we don't want you here. So it does seem as if, they want to make themselves prove a point that isn't going to make a difference. People don't care about test scores necessarily, and they're taught when these people are admissions officers, to look at more than just test scores. Because they say they get those every single day. And some of these kids are, taught only to take tests depending upon where they may have come from, if they came especially from an Asian country. And these people don't want people that just can take tests. They want overall well-rounded individuals. And if they feel like you're not a well-rounded individual, they're just not going to choose you. They may choose someone with the lower test score because they're not interested in the highest test scores. And this is what I think people don't understand. And I don't think that there's anything that's going to change about people actually being smart that are doing the admissions processes. And I don't think it should. I do think it's a shame that people feel as if they can objectify the African American community, and it does make me angry, and use us as a pawn as they've been used in Asian communities, because again, we see this violence, this cycle of violence. And for those who, did leave Harvard, decided they didn't want to bother with it, I applaud you on that, because that's a big decision, because that's your life. But you see how their decision affected you. That's how my life has been as well. When that violence affects you and you have to change your life path and do things that maybe you weren't going to do before because violence or racism indirectly affects you. Because you just don't want to be around racism anymore. You don't want to be around it. You're sick of it. So if this person is going to be at Harvard and you perceive them as being racist and you decide not to go, that changes your life path. And that's part of the reason why these people are here. They're kind of like NPCs, but they're here to be pawns in order to push you off of your game, so to speak. And we have to start realizing that in African American communities in particular. How that subtle violence is affecting us. And it comes at us in many different ways. Now, one of the last examples, because I'm not going to talk but so much today, I saw recently a young lady who talked about the bystander effect. Now, many people who have studied psychology understand the bystander effect. There's an infamous story about a young lady who was a white person in a black community, and people didn't necessarily trust her. And she was killed, and the black community just stood around and watched, and people wondered why. Why didn't people help her? Now, I hate this example because it's more than likely something that would happen to a black woman in another community, in a white community, and so forth and so on. But this was the example that's literally textbook, right? What it wants to show, I think, most of all, is the internalized oppression that people have. How people it's not only about obedience, right? We're not talking about Milgram or anything like that, which was the example that the woman really gave on the TikTok that I was watching, or the Instagram reel, I'm sorry. Whatever it was, I was watching it on Instagram. It was more like Milgram's experiment, where she was basically obedient because a teacher told her to be quiet and to be still and not to touch a goldfish, which he laid on the desk, which was out of water and was about to die. And he just became an evil person, and the students didn't know what to do. He said they were going to fail if they touched this dying goldfish. And one of the students said, F it, and put the goldfish back in the tank. I mean, because I think in the back of her mind, she knew she's not going to fail this class because this man's not crazy. Whatever's going on, I'm going to put the goldfish into the water because the bowl was there and just let the thing live. But, yeah, that's more like the Milgram experiment, excuse me. But, about obedience and authority. I think in many different cases, that's not the situation. Most of the time, yes, it could be peer pressure, but it's not that. It's the distrusting of the other. They perceive themselves in situations such as that. When I say they, I mean the audience, the people who are viewing the violence, as non-participants, as why should I do something? Why or how does it affect me? And I don't know her. I don't like her. And you will see that in different communities. Say, for instance, if you go overseas and everyone looks alike, or they have their own community, and something happens to an American, and sometimes even Black Americans, they don't like us because they're uneducated, because, they perceive us as being a stereotype. And if something happens to us, they'll either say it's because it's our own fault and they won't help us, or they'll have internalized oppression because of things going on in their own community. And you'd be surprised at how fast they try to take out their anger on you just for no reason. And they feel they're justified because they're just not educated. And I think that we need to start recognizing this happening in our own communities. We don't need obedience. That's not the situation. The situation is we need to know when it's appropriate for us to participate in this type of violence. And if that violence involves viewing women without their permission, the Diddy situation, which I commented on as well, where he has a new victim, and that victim goes explicitly into things with Jaguar Wright that happened to her, being R-worded, and other people. I don't watch MTV, Drewski, and all of that silly stuff. I stopped watching MTV in the early thousands because it became so stupid. Excuse me, I don't like the word stupid, silly. So I don't know any of these people, but these are obviously people that were put on by Diddy, his network, or whatever Revolt used to be his network, I don't know. But they were participating in this because of compliance and because I really felt like they weren't going to get caught. But it was more so other people that worked there were, pretty much bystanders, and they watched it happen. And in some instances, they even participated. So, yeah, you can say money was a factor there, but what else makes people participate in a behavior that is harmful towards women, such as sexual assault, and have no guilt, no remorse, no nothing? And you have to ask yourself things such as that. What type of people participate in any type of subtle violence, watching people without their permission, going along with actual stalking of individuals and then trying to play it off, so to speak, where it is a joke, especially where women and sexual assault are concerned. We have to start asking ourselves, are we participating in this subtle violence? And we're that little fish on the table, begging for our lives, and having people who aren't the most mature people in the world, suddenly have to make a decision because they were put into positions of authority that they don't need to have. And now this is going to be made worse with Trump. I've seen this happen before. Trust me, especially with white supremacists, that is what they like, to have people who have no idea what they're doing, create chaos, and put people who aren't able to make good decisions in positions of authority. They want themselves to be the ones who are the purveyors of the bystander effect. They want to make the decision of whether or not they should put that fish in the tank and then provoke measures of violence while that fish is still sitting there flapping, which aren't going to make any sense. Well, we shouldn't do that because it's DEI to put the fish back in the tank, things of that nature, ridiculous arguments that make no sense. We obviously see that they use a lot of masks and covers, such as DEI, CRT. I've already been through all of that, and anything else they make up. And I find that to be incredibly stupid that people continue to allow for this to happen and not speak on these things. And that's one of those bystander effects, too. People aren't speaking because they're afraid. Now, they're on TikTok and they're venting and Instagram and whatever else they're on. But on a national level, other than maybe Jasmine Crockett, and I think she's the most subtle of people, if you really want to know the truth, we aren't getting people that have the power to combat this in a very direct and honest manner. I mean, white supremacy needs to stop. The violence is only going to be projected further. And as we get into our daily lives and it starts to trickle down and affect us, we're going to find that we're going to be in trouble. And don't be shocked when that subtle violence, because that should be the first thing that you always notice. When people start displaying measures of violence towards you, I don't care if they're from another country. I don't care if they're people you know in your family. Always notice that first. And sometimes they're close to us and we don't want to see it. Like if I see my daughter doing something that's unusual, I'm like, why is she acting that way? Now, we're so close, I would ask her, why are you acting that way? Or my son who's adopted, who has autism, sometimes it's difficult with him. He has ADHD as well, trying to navigate why he's acting that way. But I do try to I do try to address it whenever possible. Even if I can't control it, at least I addressed it so that we cannot be fooled into believing that this is normal behavior. And I think this is where we're at right now with the subtle forms of violence and provocation. We need to start identifying the violence directly, even if it's not physical, so that we can stop the provocation in the future. You do have to pay it forward. Do something now so that in the future we will not be affected. So that's pretty much what this week's podcast is about. I've seen violence in every single form known to man. And it's not like we don't have the education like in some countries. We really do. You guys know I was in Asia. And they are clueless in some countries. Clueless. And so then when we get the best of their best over and competing with us, and we, didn't have the best of the best, you guys know that. Funding for education especially, it's frustrating. It's a dichotomy, definitely. But we know better. And we know that we should not be enacting any form of violence towards women, black women, or anyone else within our community. And we must recognize when that violence is there so that we can stop it, so that they can't attack our children, so that this will not be the case in the future. And I do worry about my children. I do worry about if someone finally got to them that was trying to get to me because they're so jealous. I do worry if that racism will affect their self-esteem, because it's hard. We still give our kids the talk about going in the store without big bags because people will think they're stealing. We, still give our kids the talk, make sure your clothes are clean and everything so that people won't make racist associations with you. Things of that nature. Or when you go outside and if a police officer follows you, how to behave and to make sure you don't let, in my situation, don't let that cop touch you. Don't let that cop follow you. Don't let that cop harass you, especially with my son. Don't let that police officer, become your friend, quote unquote, and take advantage of you. You have to tell your children this even when they go to school. And you worry still. Because unfortunately, that is the world that we live in. But it doesn't have to be. Yeah, and one other thing I saw too overseas was the fact that children play outside and no one questions if they're going to be okay. They let their kids still walk and play and do all these things that we stopped doing probably back in the early 80s. And I think that this is partly because we let the society we live in control us. And that violence now is pervasive. I do believe that in some societies it's still not safe. I'm not saying Asia is the best place in the world. There's people who have mental health issues all over the country and all over the world. But I'm saying in some areas it's seen as being quite strange that children have to protect themselves constantly. Now, they got other issues. They got issues with, internalized anger and too much conformity and all kinds of things, that I don't want to talk about here, whether it be religious conformity to Islam or whatever religion they are, or, just basically conforming to their own cultural norm where everything has to be quiet and the same. Everyone has their issues. So nothing is ever going to be that easy, but one thing we need to know is we can make things easier on ourselves by stopping that projected violence so that our children hopefully can live their lives without fear. And that's all we can hope for. I personally do not plan on living my life in fear, although you guys know I've had issues with this situation where, again, I'm perceived as being too nice, and people take advantage of that situation. But, to take that experiment one step further, if you were to take that fish and instead throw it in the trash can, instead of putting it in the water where you could have just stood there, that goes a step towards psychosis at that point. Or harass the fish or whatever, because you really want to go along with the peer pressure to really look good for your teacher, because you're going to make sure you get an A instead of failing the class. That's where we are right now in our society. That decision-making point. And it's sad that some people don't even want to put the fish in the water. They want to harass the fish and make sure they get rid of it. And I think we need to understand when we're approaching psychosis. And that is a very real thing right now. You have to examine yourselves within the perspective of a person who is losing the ability to make conscious decisions that will affect everyone else as well as yourselves. When I say conscious, I mean ideally intelligent and conscious decisions. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. Like I said, I had a very busy week. I'm always busy. I'm always doing everything. But I do want to take time to get my podcast in and let you guys know. Obviously, I got skin in the game. I've been in this activist space for a very long time, and I'm not planning on leaving anytime soon. So I'll talk to you guys a bit later. I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Again, I'm Alicia M. Gray, and I'm out. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.